Behind every great man there stands a woman is an old proverb which was popularised by the feminist movement of the 1960s and 70s. Originating from the 1940s, it is a simple saying, simply acknowledging, at a time when women were less likely to work and be successful in business, that a lot of successful men's achievements were made possible by the support and the hard work of their wives or female partners, which often goes unrecognised. Of course, some great men are gay, like Alan Turing, Oscar Wilde, and Frederick the Great, and behind them typically stands another gay man, rather than a woman, but we can probably forgive feminists in the 1960s and 70s for adopting a somewhat heteronormative proverb. It cannot be easy being the romantic partner of a football manager. Just imagine Mrs. Guardiola getting the flash score or BBC notification through to see that Manchester City have lost yet again, 6 in a row now, and then Pep traipses through the front door, looking like he's just been to the seaside covered in bird feed, with his face scratched to pieces, and when she asks him how his day has been or what he wants for tea, he just keeps on shouting, "It's because it's Rico Lewis at her." These intros are getting weirder and weirder, aren't they? Anyway, football management is much like a marriage, and behind every great manager, more often than not, stands a great assistant manager. Or, in Eddie Howe's case, usually standing in front of him. Like housewives of the 1960s, the hard graft and vital work done by assistant managers can often go unnoticed. Well, not today. Today we recognise the men in the shadows. Not like that. That sounds almost sinister, doesn't it? But focusing not on managers or head coaches, who frankly get far too much credit already, but on their sympathetic sidekicks, dependable deputies, and rigorous right-hand men, taking a look at some of the greatest assistant managers that the game has ever seen. Thanks must go to Kyle Mann, who sent in this suggestion, and it was the second most liked comment on my recent video about the Premier League's dodgy PSR transfers. I mean, honestly, you do this job for 7.5 years, and just when you think that you're starting to understand it, you discover that your subscribers want a video about the game's greatest assistant managers, and you realise that you really knew nothing all along. Anyway, Christmas is a time for giving, if you celebrate it. This is the People's Channel, and so the people get what they want. Without further ado, who hasn't yet worked as an assistant, here are some of the greatest assistant managers of all time. 7th, Steve Clarke. I should clarify, because I neglected to mention it in the introduction, I was too busy talking about the 1960s feminist movement and the former Prussian monarch Frederick the Great being a homosexual, that it is difficult to come up with a definitive criteria for determining football's greatest assistant managers. That is partly because the most capable and confident assistants often back themselves to take on the top job before long, and therefore don't spend that much time working as an assistant. The likes of Jose Mourinho and Joachim Löw were at one time assistant managers, for example, and to all intents and purposes very good ones, or Mikel Arteta to give you an even more recent example, but they are all better known as head coaches or managers. I even saw someone describe Zinedine Zidane as the greatest assistant manager of all time while researching this video, on the basis that, in his single season as Carlo Ancelotti's assistant at Real Madrid, in the 2013-14 season, Los Blancos won both the Champions League and the Copa del Rey. Now, I've no doubt that Zizou made a very useful contribution that season, and could have become an outstanding assistant, but I can promise you that no one is making this 7 off the back of a single season as an assistant. No, the criteria, which is undeniably, and I think unavoidably nebulous, is based upon the amount of time that a coach spends as an assistant, the success that they enjoyed, either relative or absolute, as a number 2, and what kind of contribution they had within that partnership or success, insofar as we can discern it. The alternative would be to pick the 7 assistant managers whose clubs won the most trophies while they were employed as assistants by them, but I don't think that would celebrate the actual greatest assistants, and I think we can all agree it would be more boring. Right, I'm glad that we cleared that up. With that in mind, getting us started is a man who has become a head coach, not entirely lacking in success there, but unless he can win the World Cup with Scotland, one suspects that he will always be most celebrated for his phenomenal work as an assistant. A Chelsea legend who was included in the club's all-time 11 in 2005, Steve Clarke first became an assistant coach at Newcastle United to his former Chelsea teammate Ruud Gullit immediately after retiring. Gullit and Clarke had both retired at Stamford Bridge at the end of the 1997-98 season, and though Gullit's time at St James's Park would be short-lived, the duo still managed to reach an FA Cup final. After Gullit was sacked by Newcastle, Sir Bobby Robson retained Clarke's services as his assistant for the remainder of that season. Clarke left Newcastle to coach Chelsea's youth team, but when Jose Mourinho was appointed in 2004, he picked Clarke as his assistant. It proved to be a masterstroke. For all of Mourinho's talent and bravado, in a time of great tumult, bordering upon a revolution at Chelsea, it was vital that he had someone who was level-headed, understood English football, and knew Chelsea inside out by his side. In Steve Clarke, Mourinho had that and then some. A tactically astute football obsessive, Mourinho has heaped praise upon Clarke's role in Chelsea's success in the past, drawing particular attention to the positivity that he brought to the team and the constant support that he offered him. Together, Mourinho and Clarke, admittedly aided by enormous investment on Roman Abramovich's part, took Chelsea to the summit of the English game for the first time in a very, very long time, winning 2 Premier League titles, 2 League Cups, and an FA Cup in only 3 seasons. Both Avram Grant and, very briefly, Luis Felipe Scolari kept Steve Clarke on as their assistants too, before the Scot joined West Ham United working under Gianfranco Zola, and Liverpool, where he was the number 2 under Rafa Benitez, Kenny Dalglish, and Brendan Rodgers. All told, Clarke spent about 12 years working as an assistant, all of his managers loved him, none wanted rid of him, and he was not only successful but integral to his most successful spell, ensuring that Jose Mourinho had a smooth transition into the English game. 6th, Jupp Derwall. Is Jupp Derwall one of the greatest assistant managers of all time? Yep, I'd say so. Sorry about that. No, I do honestly, I sincerely apologise. A twice-capped German international who banged in goals like it was going out of fashion during the 1950s, at a time when the feminist movement was really yet to take off, Derwall had limited experience in management when the great Helmut Schön asked him to become his assistant manager with West Germany's national team. As if that wasn't a daunting prospect enough, Derwall was also replacing the hugely talented Udo Lattek, who departed to take the top job at Bayern Munich, where he was extremely successful. Derwall had a fantastic football brain himself, though. His tactically cautious yet relatively laid-back attitude complemented Schön's carefree revolution as West Germany began playing much more expansive football. Schön, who was himself an outstanding assistant to the much more disciplined and strict Sepp Herberger within the national team for 8 whole years, gave Franz Beckenbauer the freedom to play as a sweeper, had made attacking young fullbacks Bertie Vogts and Paul Breitner a cornerstone of his system, and, unlike his predecessor and former boss, he made room for maverick midfield playmakers like Gunter Netzer and Wolfgang Overath. Together, Schön and Derwall took West Germany to 5 tournaments in 8 years in total, reaching the semi-finals of the 1970 World Cup and finishing 3rd, winning Euro 1972, which was Germany's first ever Euros win, winning the 1974 World Cup, which was only Germany's 2nd World Cup win, reaching the final of Euro 1976, and then finishing 6th at the 1978 World Cup in Argentina. Out of 5 tournaments, therefore, the duo reached 3 finals and won 2 of them. Derwall took over from Schön as West Germany's head coach following the 1978 World Cup, and he managed to win Euro 1980 and reach the final of the 1982 World Cup, before he was effectively forced out and replaced by Franz Beckenbauer following a group stage exit at Euro 1984. A brilliant coach and an especially brilliant assistant, Derwall died in 2007 aged 80, but he deserves to be remembered as a genuine giant of the German game. 5th, Brian Kidd. Arguably the Premier League's greatest assistant, Brian Kidd was the number 2 at both Manchester clubs when they won Premier League titles for the very first time. A former Manchester United and Manchester City player, and an excellent one at that, who was also born in Manchester, Kidd briefly managed Barrow and Preston North End before he was brought back to Old Trafford as a youth team coach in 1988. Kidd played a key role in nurturing Man United's future class of '92, most notably Ryan Giggs, who could just as easily have been nicknamed Kidd's Kids as well as Fergie's fledglings, and when Sir Alex's assistant Archie Knox moved on to Rangers, he gave the job to Kidd. While Sir Alex would go on to rattle through excellent assistants with frightening frequency later on in his career, including the likes of Steve McLaren and Carlos Queiroz, he kept Kidd by his side for more than a decade. Kidd sat in the dugout alongside Fergie in 559 of his 1,500 games in charge of Manchester United, playing a pivotal role in that first Premier League title in 1993, along with 3 more that followed. A world-class coach, while Ferguson was known for his hands-off approach throughout much of the week, Kidd played a key role in ensuring that the Red Devils set the highest standards in training of any club in England. But don't just take my word for it, listen to what Gary Neville had to say about him.
I've known him since I was like 12, 13, and he's always wanted to improve himself. Even when he got the assistant manager's job, he was always off, in international weeks, looking at other teams, looking at other ways of making his own skills better, and then in turn it would improve the team's training, and his training was absolutely magnificent. I've never played under any coach that could make training so interesting.
Cheers, Gary. And well done for not sneaking in an advert for Huel there. Kidd left Manchester United to become head coach at Blackburn Rovers in 1998, which clearly hurt Ferguson, and when he spoke about his former assistants in not especially glowing terms in his autobiography, it created a rift between the pair of them that would take years to repair. Out on his own, Kidd lasted less than 12 months at Ewood Park before becoming an assistant again to David O'Leary, Terry Venables and Peter Reid at Leeds United for more than 3 years, followed by a spell as Sven-Goran Eriksson's assistant with England, and under Neil Warnock and Brian Robson at Sheffield United. In December 2009, new Manchester City boss Roberto Mancini appointed Kidd as his assistant, and it proved to be an absolute masterstroke. Once again, it provided a manager who was new to the English game, with a right-hand man who not only knew it, the club and the region inside out, but also what it takes to win a Premier League title at a club that hadn't won a top-flight league title in over 40 years. Together, Mancini and Kidd would win Man City's first FA Cup since the 60s and first title of the Premier League era, the latter secured thanks to a dramatic Sergio Aguero goal in injury time. While Mancini soon departed, his successors, Manuel Pellegrini and Pep Guardiola, both recognised the value of keeping Kidd around. Kidd, or Kiddo as he is more affectionately known, spent 12 years as an assistant at the Etihad in total, spanning more than 600 matches, in which Man City became the dominant force in English football. Kidd retired in 2021, during COVID, aged 72. Fourth, Bobby Haarms. When you think of Ajax, most people probably think of Rinus Michels, Johan Cruyff, and robbing Manchester United blind for Anthony, but few people, if any, dedicated more of their lives to the club and their pursuit of footballing excellence than Bobby Haarms. Born and raised in Amsterdam, Haarms became a full member of Ajax's youth team at the age of 13, beginning a 53-year association with the club. That spanned all the way from the immediate post-war era to the turn of the millennium, during which time there was arguably no more influential club in all of European football. Haarms' playing days were relatively unremarkable, halted by injury after just 58 appearances at Ajax, but 7 years after being forced to retire from football, age 33, he received an all-important call from Rinus Michels, who wanted Haarms to become his assistant. Michels and Cruyff were the visionaries, but without the drive and relentless enthusiasm of Haarms, which bled through to Ajax's players, along with his excellent interpersonal and motivational skills, it seems unlikely that Ajax would have enjoyed the levels of success that they did. It is an extraordinary stat that for every single one of Ajax's 6 European Cup or Champions League finals, Bobby Haarms was in the dugout, as well as their UEFA Cup win in 1992. In total, Haarms was Ajax's assistant manager for over 1,200 competitive fixtures. He coached the likes of Cruyff, Van Basten and Bergkamp, and he worked under managers ranging from Michels to Cruyff and Van Gaal. Haarms died in 2009, aged 75, but he is rightly immortalised in bronze form outside of the Johan Cruyff Arena in Amsterdam. Third, Peter Taylor. There are lots of managers who one imagines could have enjoyed similar levels of success with different assistants, and plenty of assistants who likely could have made an equally significant contribution working alongside a different head coach. That is not true of Peter Taylor and Brian Clough though, maybe the most iconic and impressive managerial duo that the English game has ever seen. On their own, Clough failed spectacularly at Leeds United, sacked after just 44 days, and struggled to relive the heights that he had enjoyed alongside Taylor at Forest, suffering relegation from the Premier League in his final season. Meanwhile, Taylor did nothing of note in the top job at either Brighton or Derby, being sacked relatively swiftly by both. Together, however, they were a force of nature. As Clough put it, quote, "I'm not equipped to manage successfully without Peter Taylor. I am the shop window, and he is the goods in the back." End quote. Clough was doing himself a disservice, of course, and being very rarely modest. For all of the swagger and ostentation, he was more than just a shop window, and as Taylor proved independently, those goods were of little use in the back without the shop window, but he was right to frame Taylor as being integral to their success. Whereas Clough was a world-class motivator and man manager, Taylor was tactically astute, he balanced out some of Clough's eccentricities, shall we just say, and he was a genius when it came to recruitment. Together, Clough and Taylor took Derby County from 2nd Division strugglers to 1st Division champions, and Nottingham Forest from 2nd Division also-rans to winning 2 European Cups. The two parted company for the last time in 1982, when Taylor announced his retirement, before making a surprise comeback as head coach at Derby County. After Derby signed John Robertson from Clough's Forest in 1983, Clough and Taylor had a spectacular falling out, and tragically, they remained not on speaking terms until Taylor's premature death in 1990, which Clough lived to regret. Call your friends. Life's too short. Who would have thought that it would be the 7 greatest assistant managers video that would be the one offering up important life lessons? But here we are. Anyway, Peter Taylor was the perfect assistant for Brian Clough, strong, independently minded, and not afraid to challenge him, while also knowing what he was talking about, that always helps, and having a fantastic eye for a player. Third seems harsh if anything, but this is a formidable podium. Second, Jimmy Murphy. One of the most consequential figures in the history of Manchester United, Jimmy Murphy's career was a tale of triumph, tragedy, and then triumph once again. A capable wing-half who won 15 caps for Wales before his career was halted by World War II, it was while giving an impassioned speech to a band of troops during the war about football that Murphy left an impression on Matt Busby. After the war had ended, as a result, when Busby was appointed by Manchester United, his first signing was actually Jimmy Murphy, initially as a chief coach. Murphy was responsible for the development of the Busby Babes, an extremely talented group of young players who came through the Manchester United youth ranks at the same time, many of whom tragically died in the Munich air disaster in 1958. Jimmy Murphy wasn't on that flight, despite becoming Busby's full-time assistant in 1955, because he was away managing Wales at the time. Bert Worley, the coach who travelled with the team instead of him, was among the 23 fatalities. Busby survived but was injured, forcing Murphy to take temporary charge of first-team duties while he recovered. The Manchester United squad had been decimated by death, serious injuries, and severe trauma. Murphy was as impacted by that trauma as anyone, having been so close to many of the young players who were killed, but his spirit, positivity, and love of the club played a vital role in Manchester United's survival and rebirth. Murphy stayed on as Man United's assistant manager until the end of Matt Busby's second stint in charge of the club in 1971, overseeing their extraordinary recovery from Munich to win 2 First Division titles and become the first English club to lift the European Cup in the late 1960s. He was Manchester United's assistant manager for over 1,000 games, 980 of which came under Busby. Murphy died in 1989, aged 79, but his enormous legacy lives on. A statue of him was unveiled outside of the Stretford End at Old Trafford in 2023, and Man United's Best Academy Player each season is awarded with the Jimmy Murphy Young Player of the Year award. First, Anatoli Puzach. If you were to build the perfect assistant manager in a lab, you'd want someone who was fiercely loyal, an excellent communicator, understood the game like the back of their hand, and didn't have great personal ambition to become a manager themselves. Step forward Anatoli Puzach, probably the greatest assistant manager who has ever lived, but who shunned the limelight to such an extent that, somewhat inconveniently for me, there are no photos of him in the Getty Images database. I will be using images of the 1990s girl group All Saints instead, whose self-titled debut album reached number 2 on the UK album charts, as is tradition. Please don't let that distract you from the talents or accomplishments of Anatoli Puzach. Born in wartime Soviet Union, Puzach starred for a number of clubs in the former Ukrainian SSR, most notably Dynamo Kyiv, as well as winning 14 caps for the USSR and representing them at the 1970 World Cup. After hanging up his boots, soon-to-be legendary manager Valery Lobanovsky appointed him as his assistant at Dynamo. Lobanovsky is fondly remembered as a tactical revolutionary and one of the greatest managers and Ukrainians to have ever lived, but he did it all with Puzach by his side. Key to what is sometimes described as Lobanovsky's collective or scientific football, Puzach and Lobanovsky were constantly challenging each other and sharpening their understanding of the game and how it should be played, with staggering results. In his 2 long stints as Lobanovsky's assistant, encompassing almost 1,000 games, the duo won 8 Soviet top league titles, 6 Soviet Cups, and 2 European Cup Winners' Cups, beating Ferencváros and Atletico Madrid in those 2 finals, along with some 12 other trophies. Lobanovsky was the visionary, but Puzach was key to challenging his ideas, motivating Dynamo's players, and taking training sessions, which were widely lauded as being maybe the most intense and advanced in Europe at the time. Puzach tried his hand as a head coach once, with Dynamo between 1990 and 1992, while Lobanovsky was coaching the United Arab Emirates, where he won yet another Soviet top league title in one of only 2 seasons in charge, but he was primarily an assistant, and probably the greatest one that there has ever been. That is it for my 7, but very honourable mentions must go to a vast array of outstanding assistant managers who just missed out, including the likes of Malcolm Allison, Pat Rice, Ronnie Moran, Zeljko Buvac, Pep Linders, Steve McLaren, Mike Phelan, Carlos Queiroz, Tony Grande, Tito Villanova, German Bagos, Herman Gerland, Sammy Lee, Rui Faria, Angelo Alessio, and maybe most notably Fabio Capello's longtime assistant, Italo Galbiate, alongside many, many others. Thank you all very much, as ever, for watching. Bit of a different one. Hit the like button if you enjoyed it, though. I hope that that was the case, obviously. It would be weird if I hoped that you disliked it, but apologies if that was the case, I guess. Let me know your thoughts down below in the comments and why you did despise it so much. Hit the like button, as I say, if you did enjoy it. And make sure that you're subscribed and have notifications turned on, not just for this channel, HITC Sevens, but also my second channel, of course, Alfie Potts Harmer, both of which should be about to appear on your screens now, along with a couple of videos that you might enjoy watching after this one. You can also find me on Twitter, Instagram, Threads, and now Blue Sky, all of which should be easily done via the video description below. Links and all sorts of other good stuff down there. So, check that out if you feel so inclined. Cheers. Have a brilliant day.